Hey YouTube! My name is April James. I am a professional painter, decorator, and DIYer and have been for over 20 years. Over the years, I've taught hundreds of people in person, just like you, how to get a professional result in their DIY projects. And now I'm bringing all the fun here to YouTube. So if you like what you see here, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can find me easily for your next project. You know what? I'm not a fan of small talk, so let's just get right to the project for today. Today I'm going to show you how I took this old weathered table and gave it a whole new look. The finish on it was totally weathered, flaking and falling off, and so it was definitely time for a makeover. For my inspiration, I had this hand-painted flower pot that calls this table home, and I used the little diamond triangle areas as inspiration. I can't wait to show you how I took this weathered table and gave it a whole new personality. After completely sanding the whole top with 80 grit sandpaper, I then went around and took any loose chunks out. You really don't want to paint over anything that's all loose and flaky. You want to really have a solid surface to paint over. Okay, so I've sanded the tabletop, I've cleaned out all of the crevices of any loose debris, I've vacuumed it out really well, and now I'm ready to mix up my putty that I'm going to use. So the putty I like to use is Durham's Rock Hard Putty. Been using it for years. It's just great. It dries real hard and it doesn't shrink up. It paints well. So it comes in a powder. So I'm just gonna move the camera a little bit. Comes in a powder and I just mix a little bit at a time because you really don't need a lot. So just gonna put some powder in. And you can kind of mix it according to how thick you want it. Sometimes I've mixed it super thick. But I just want it to be a good putty texture, so I never really measure. That's going to be a little too runny, so I'm just going to add a little more powder. So I want to be able to spread this in with my putty knife. So here you can see I'm just going over the whole surface of the table, filling in all the cracks, all the crevices. So there's really nowhere for the water to sit and pool and get into that wood. I just wanted a nice smooth finish so that I can get on with the painting. Okay, so the whole tabletop has been filled with my putty, and it looks kind of funky right now, but that's all right. I'm gonna let that dry. In the meantime, I'm gonna take care of all these edges that are still pretty rough. If you try to sand this little lip with my rotary sander, my orbital sander, then it'll just kind of ruin that. So I'm gonna be using my Ryobi detail sander, and it will just go right along these edges. Now it's time to give some attention to the bottom of this table. Super weathered, but you know, it's got good bones, so I'm just going to give it a good sand with some 80 grit sandpaper and my orbital sander, and it'll be ready for stain. For this project, I'm using Valspar One Coat Exterior Stain and Sealer in Canyon Brown. It really does go on in one coat. I'm just using a 2-inch chip brush to get into all those cracks and crevices. And I coated the entire bottom side of the table after I got it all sanded down to the bare wood. Now just a little tip about getting an even finish when you're staining. See these areas where it's a little bit lighter? Those are areas that I didn't get the existing finish sanded all the way down to the bare wood. And that prevents the stain from soaking in and looking the same as the rest of the table. Since it's the bottom of the table, I'm not going to really care too much this time. Now it's time to turn my attention back to the top of the table. I've sanded all the putty down, it's nice and smooth and ready for me to add a primer coat. Now typically with Sloan chalk paint, I never use a primer, but since this wood is bare in some places and it's got putty in the other places, I'm going to use a primer just to even out the playing field. That'll give me a nice smooth finish in the end and help me use less coats of paint. This is the primer I like to use. It's made by Zinsser, it's water-based, and it goes on super smooth. I just used a 4-inch foam roller to get one good coat on there, and then I'm ready for paint. Okay, so I've got my Sloan chalk paint here. It is Old White, and it's kind of thick because my lid has been a little crusty around the top, so it didn't close super great. So it's a little bit thick, and that's no problem at all because I'm just going to add a little water to it and mix it right up. Actually, I think I'll do this a little bit more. And I'm just going to stir that up so it's a nice, good texture. This is a water-based paint. I don't need to worry about adding the water to it. Get it to a nice, whatever consistency I want. Just going to stir that super great. And then I've got my Sloan large round brush here, but you can use any bristle brush. I prefer to use these big moppy brushes, but you can use a flat paint brush as well. And you could use synthetic bristles or natural, doesn't matter. So that looks about right to me. And all I gotta do is just get after it. My tip for getting a nice smooth finish with Sloan paint is first of all to add water, which I've already done, and then just to do multiple thin coats if you have to. I only did 2 coats on this. I had the primer already, but just thin coats and you should be good to go. Remember the hand painted pot I showed you in the beginning? Well, now's when I take this design and try to translate it onto the tabletop. I decided just to hand draw some diamond shapes, and I've just used a board I had in my shop. This is where I think a lot of people get stuck, is they think they need to measure everything perfectly and find all the right tools and everything. I just get scrappy with it, do what I can with what I have, and I just used the board to space out the lines and just moved across as I went. Remembering how the pot was very hand painted and a little bit messy, I knew that it was okay for me to kind of have a little bit of imperfectness in my painting as well as in the lines and everything. So I'm just going and freehanding the lines on here. In order to draw lines like this with a paintbrush, you need to just keep your paintbrush wet, make sure you've got plenty of paint on there. And I kind of roll the round brush as I go to distribute the paint. Otherwise, the side of the brush you're using will get dried out. Now I'm just going to use a round foam dauber. I'm sure that that's the actual name for it. but whatever it's called, you can find them in most craft stores. I'm just using the same paint and just adding a little interest by adding a circle to each of the intersections of the diamonds. Now it's time to draw some flowers. I'm using Sloan chalk paint in English yellow with just a little bit of Barcelona orange as well, just to give me just the right color. Again, I don't need this to be perfect. If I wanted things to be perfect, I would have used a stencil or done a different technique. But I wanted this to be very hand painted to match the feel of the pot that was going to be on it. With the flowers done, it's now time for a top coat. I'm using a Spar urethane by Minwax, and it's again water base, so that's going to help to prevent it from turning yellow. Always make sure that you stir, stir, and stir when you're using products like this, because the hardeners that really help this be a durable finish like to settle in the bottom of the can, so you want to make sure you stir those up and get them scraped off the bottom of the can and stirred into the product really well so that you can get a long-lasting durable finish. I'm just using a foam roller, and I'm going to follow all the directions on the can just like I always recommend people do. I'm doing 3 coats of this, but I'm giving 2 hours of dry time in between each coat, and I'm sanding in between each coat with 800 grit sandpaper. And there you have it. I am pretty happy with the way this turned out, and so is my mother-in-law who owns the table. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and feel free to share it with your creative friends. This is my debut video here on YouTube, so thanks for being patient while I get better at all the things, and let me know what you think in the comments below. And while you're there in the comment section, feel free to ask any questions and make any requests for future videos.